Thank you to the Mining Journal for having us. I'm just going to start off and say that obviously conglomerate gold in the Pilbara can be a hot button topic, and there are some very divided views on it. I'm going to preface this presentation by saying that, one, I'm a believer in it. I am long a number of stocks in the area, and our company has financed a few of them. So just so you cover my perspective is, but I'm going to try and show both sides of the argument and what's out there. So before we get into what we know and where things are, let's start with where we've been. This play is only about 13 months old. In May 2017, Novo Resources, who's been the main player, and we're going to talk about them a lot, but just because they've been the main player in the area, have staked their first ground. And everyone kind of no one paid that much attention to it, including myself. Just thought, oh, they're grabbing some more ground, it looks interesting. And then in July 2017, the picture on the left was published, along with a YouTube video of some guys with metal detectors going off, and created a significant run. I have to tell you that shortly after that July 2017 video was released, I was promptly put on an airplane and told, go find out what's going on in Western Australia, because we need to have a view for our investors. The next step provided some validation with Kirkland Lake dumping about $50 million to buy 10% of Novo into the company. They bought another 10% via an acquisition from shares from Newmont, and ended up being a 20% stakeholder, providing some credibility to the area, if you will. And then it sort of snowballed from there. It became a staking rush and a land rush, and a number of both Australian and Canadian juniors all went out and staked as much of what's considered the favorable contact, which is the contact between the Mount Roe basalt and the basement. And that resulted in multiple companies coming up with nugget discoveries, if you will, and creating a little luster in the space. And then the shine came off a little bit in November 2017 and December 2017, when Novo determined that they weren't actually going to be able to drill to prove a resource. And a lot of people looked around at each other and said, well, it all looks great and interesting, and there's this huge area of potential, but if they can't drill, how are they going to prove there's a resource, and how are they going to prove there's economics? And that's created the sort of the second camp of investors for me, which is I guess we'll describe them as atheists a little bit later in the presentation. However, the work has continued in the area, and the bulk sample size has gotten to a fairly large level. They're doing 5 tons. We saw the first results out in late May, so about a year after this started, and all of a sudden it looks like we have a methodology I believe that they have a methodology to prove a small resource, which will give us the potential to go forward. So, what do we know now, 13 months in? Well, I can tell you right now, it's very early days. Like any new exploration area or new exploration play, 13 months in, if this was a traditional play, we'd be looking at maybe second pass drill results, where the companies are following up, trying to figure out strike extent and size. So it is early days, and I've used this comment before. If you were going to look at a scale of 1 to 10, for 1 being a early stage exploration project, maybe a good idea, to 10 being something you could actually go out and mine, we're probably at about a 3, and that's Novo, not necessarily all the other players who are certainly behind them. But that being said, there is big scale potential. This map on the right is borrowed from one of Novo's documents, but many of the companies have this. The definition of nugget finds of very similar style is over a huge area. You're looking at that map, the space between those dots is a east-west extent of almost 250 kilometers and a north-south extent of 150 kilometers. Oddly enough, marking either side of the Pilbara Basin. But that potential is what gets us excited about it. And it has resulted in some wild numbers being tossed about as to how big this could be. But it gives us the view that there could be more than one major discovery in this area. And then in March, I had the opportunity to attend a Pilbara Gold Conference, and obviously it is early days. But the key thing from that, was a bunch of experts on the WITS going, well, this isn't really the WITS. And I would tell you that probably the conclusion is that it's similar scale, but not quite the same thing. But it is early days as well, and so we'll see how it progresses from there. And last but not least, and when you look at this whole space, and as I mentioned earlier, Novo really is leading the charge here. So what do we have? Obviously, we have an extremely volatile sector. And you can see that from Novo's share price chart. That's from a peak of 880 in the fall till something in the neighborhood of just under $2, just under $3 in earlier this year. But I think it is an interesting exploration play because it really has created two major types of investors, and then that are passionate on either side, and then a third group that doesn't care. So the first is the zealots, and I would certainly say that I'm a zealot or a believer in this. They believe that there's big exploration potential. Typical characteristics: they're not Australian. Very rarely to see a lot of Australian people pushing this, and they're typically long multiple things in the stock, and they've usually been to site. And I can tell you this is one of those things where you had to see it to believe it, and having been to site, that's certainly what converted me. One of the arguments that my group makes is if this was found 100 years ago, we'd be mining it already. Unfortunately, it's not 100 years ago, and we'll get into that. We'll get at it a little bit later. The second group is the atheists. And the atheists are those who believe it is impossible to prove an economic resource, or it's going to cost too much money, and so it will never get there, and therefore the companies will never be able to demonstrate any kind of economics, and therefore no valuation. And that's a fair argument. Oddly enough, typically Australian, but they do come from all over the world. And the third group I call agnostic, and it's really interesting to consider in this. But the agnostics are people who either made money in Novo initially and have sold out and are saying, I don't understand the space enough, I'm not there, or have just or continue to be on the sidelines. So you get these three groups, but I think the two main groups, which are the loudest ones in this, the zealots and the atheists, are the ones that drive this volatility that we see, which from an investment perspective is always the opportunity. So what's the major challenge here, right? The major challenge is the fact that there's an extreme nugget effect. And I guess the simple thing is that we all know that 43101 and JORC compliant systems are not designed at all to handle extreme nugget effect. We see it have challenge in high-grade underground gold mines, and this is a nugget effect to the next level. And because they're primarily statistically driven. But in our view, and in my view, and in what we've seen, we think Novo has a path forward. And this is the interesting part that I think is the challenge. So you see two figures here. What do you need to have a resource? You need tons and you need grade. Well, tons actually isn't that hard to prove. Tons is, and you can see in the lower diagram, they've drilled a series of diamond drill holes through the conglomerate. They can map the unit, and they can give you a volume, and they know what the density is, and so consequently you have tons. The hard part is grade. And the method that Novo is going down is this composite bulk sample. But essentially it's like a big drill hole. This is a in the top diagram, that is a 2 meter by 2 meter by half a meter thick slice. And what they're doing is they're taking these over multiple spaces and working their way down through. So this is the favorable host conglomerate, and then into the basement rock, and then sampling the basement rock. This acts like and looks like a giant drill hole, right? Because it would be the same as you have a drill hole where you're compositing it, except it's on a much larger scale. And I think what the likely result is, and I'm not certain they're going to get to a 431 or JORC compliant resource, but they could. But it's going to be over a very small area. And that's probably the best case scenario. And that small area is then going to allow them to move into trial mining, and that trial mining will get them to demonstrate their ability to demonstrate resource, which then will allow them to expand, much like you would with a high-grade underground gold mine, where you drill off a small resource and then expand from there. Obviously, the worst case is they can't get a compliant resource. This would be a challenge for the market, but that doesn't mean they won't be able to go trial mining. And I'll talk about the fact what you need to go trial mining. And so basically, what we're at a stage is demonstrating enough of a resource to justify trial mining, and that's obviously the next step. A lot of the naysayers and a lot of people say, well, this is going to be just a big placer mine. Why don't they just go mining? And if it was 100 years ago, there would be probably several holes in the ground as we speak. However, it is not 100 years ago, and these assets are located in Western Australia, and so it takes a little bit of work to get there. The key requirement actually is in Australia is that, well, you don't need a compliant resource, you need a resource of some description. You need to prove that you have somewhat, you have mineralization, and you have a commodity that you're mining, and you have a mine plan. And obviously Novo's going, and Novo's going down that route. So you don't necessarily need a compliant resource to go mining, but you need a compliant resource, or you need a resource of some description to do the trial mining to get permits. Obviously, there's the regular permitting that you have to do for large-scale mining, environmental, et cetera. So I think this is an important feature, an important fact that Novo is progressing down, but they can't just go do it tomorrow. They have to get there. So we've talked a little bit about the space and where it is, and where we are from a progress standpoint. So we published a more fulsome report earlier this year called the Pilbara Playbook. And basically, the things that we're looking for in the space when we look at companies and what's there, because obviously at that point, there are a number of companies. So there's three key things. A big checkbook or something else. Novo has the big checkbook. They have close to $70 million in cash. They can progress. Something else is in something to underpin the valuation. Obviously, the conglomerate space is going to be very volatile. It's going to be driven primarily by Novo's results. And so you need to have something to underpin the value of the company, particularly where you're buying it. Second is that you've already identified conglomerate gold. More so than necessarily just nuggets, but particularly in situ. There's lots of guys who have staked what is believed to be prospective ground, but haven't really done a whole lot of work. And our next slide will give you a sort of a qualitative view as to what we think of the space in general. And then the last is a credible plan to move ahead. It's not enough just to have conglomerates anymore. You have to be working on it and developing it. And so those are three things that we want to see when we look at these companies, and that we think you should be looking at as well. So here are the players, and this is most certainly a qualitative slide. On the left axis is the quality of the land package. On the right axis is work completed, and this is a relative scale as well. Certainly to the area. Obviously, Novo not only is it the largest land package, it is the largest, one of the largest players in the space, and we progress down from there. And there are a number of small players. And the interesting point on this, and I think is interesting, and the bubble size is market cap, is you have a few Canadian players and a number of Australian players here, a number of Australian companies, but the relative market caps, obviously the Canadian players are getting a lot more value for their assets, and we see this in the asset transactions as well. The most recent one was Merindi Metals just sold an asset to Pacton Gold and got $14 million in stock in shares and equity for it, or cash and equity for it, and that is slightly larger. That is, Merindi's market cap prior to that transaction was about $20 million. So obviously there's a substantial amount of value to be unlocked just by crossing markets. And as I was taught long ago, it's great to have an investment theme and a thesis, but if you don't actually have names that people can invest in, then it doesn't really matter. So a few names that we like and that we've done business with, and actually I visited. First is obviously Novo. Novo I would describe as the lowest risk. Has liquidity, it's easy to get in and out, and obviously is the clear leader in the space. They're the ones who are going to find the path forward here, and they have the balance sheet to do that. They have the corporate support, or the corporate backer of Kirkland Lake to help them keep moving ahead. They have the largest land package. However, part of our view on Novo, and while we like the company and what they're doing, at north of a 700 million market cap, there is less upside. So it's lower risk, but lower upside. Moving down, I guess the next step down, the one step behind we call it, is De Grey Mining. Now De Grey has demonstrated conglomerates demonstrated gold in conglomerates on their property, but De Grey is unique as they have 1.2 million ounces of 1.6 grams in a hard rock asset. And consequently, we like that because it actually underpins the value of the asset, and now you're riding the option of conglomerate play. If Novo is successful, then they benefit from it. A third player that we like and is a relatively impressive newcomer with a smaller land package is NX Gold. NX, while it has a small land package relative to some of the other players, I've been on the ground, is relatively prospective and probably, I'd liken to Comet Weller Purdy's Reward prospectivity-wise. But it is a small market cap, which, and provides the risk of that small market cap comes with. But our view is that at a $14 million market cap, the downside is less, and the upside, the torque is higher, not only to their own results, but to Novo's. And a couple of names that we like that are doing it a little bit differently. One is Pacton, and the other is New Frontier. And we'll dig a little bit into these names in the last couple minutes of this presentation. So first and foremost, we have Novo. And just to put it in perspective, Novo is the green land package. They have more than twice the ground of everybody else by quite a bit. And I think the key thing here, and we've talked a little bit about valuation and how we get to where we think this could be, and we provide a big range because there is a lot of uncertainty. But the real conclusion here is that there still is substantial upside in Novo, and as it moves ahead, you have that potential. And the one thing they don't talk about, a lot of people don't talk about Novo, is Beaton's Creek, and Beaton's Creek does pick up a fair chunk of their value, about 25% of their 15 to 20% of their current share price, and that has upside as well. And that was one of the interesting takeaways from our visit. And people always ask this: so how big do you think it is? So how big do you think it is? This table, which you cannot read if you are sitting in the audience, and I apologize for that, but the presentation is available through the conference, so you can feel free to have a look. But this is essentially a sensitivity table where we think this resource falls and some of the conclusions or assumptions that we've made. But the basic conclusion is that we think that Purdy's Reward and Comet Well is going to be 10 to 25 million ounces at 10 to 15 grams a ton. Now, how confident are we in that? There's a reason that we put such a big range on it, and that should be reflected in our confidence. But you can, as you can see from our assumptions, you can get to a number of areas. You can get to the conclusion and do your own math and make your own assumptions about grade, etc. So from this slide. De Grey. And De Grey is very interesting for a number of reasons, but primarily because of its hard rock underpinning. Its conglomerates are up here. They're the second company to demonstrate conglomerate gold, but they have a 150-kilometer shear zone with a traditional 1.2 million ounce hard rock deposit in it. The important element there is that we think the hard rock deposit underpins everything else, and the hard rock deposit actually has exploration upside too, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Next is NX, and you can see NX's land package. As I said, it's a small land package, it's a sliver, but you could also see that, based on what we saw when we were on site and what is there, probably one of the more prospective land packages in the Pilbara, and has very good potential, and they're advancing very quickly, and they're funded to do so. And then lastly, our two honorable mentions. These are two companies that we like as well. The first is New Frontier, which is a private company, and this is one with a 6,000 square kilometer land package that should be coming public later this year, and has very good ground, including the strike extent of Purdy's Reward and Comet Well. And then Pacton. And Pacton, obviously, as I said, is taking a different approach. They're leveraging the arbitrage between Australian and Canadian valuations for conglomerate gold, and are using that to acquire assets in Australia and build a sizable land package. So those are some of the names that we like. I just want to thank everybody for attending and your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop by our booth, and we can dig into it a little bit deeper. Thanks.